Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Courtney Ryan, and today we're going to be talking about, is being vulnerable unattractive to women? So I've seen a lot of videos from specifically male content creators telling men to never be vulnerable, never show emotion, never do anything that involves being human, if we're being honest. And I kind of want to just dive a little bit deeper into the topic today and give you some examples of when being vulnerable is considered unattractive, and then maybe some examples of when it's considered attractive to make sure that you guys are not self-sabotaging and make sure that you're on the right path. So let's get started. So before we get started, I think it's important to understand what vulnerability even is. So according to Dr. Brené Brown, vulnerability is taking an emotional risk when we don't know the outcome. It entails moments, big and small, when we present our most authentic selves without knowing if we'll be accepted. So let's think here for a second about when a woman is vulnerable versus when she's not, so that you guys can kind of see when it's attractive and when it's not from your point of view. Women who struggle with being vulnerable will often say or act along the lines of, I'm a strong, independent woman and I don't need a man, or I don't want a man. But they fail to recognize that being vulnerable does not mean depending on someone or needing them per se. It just means that you're able to be yourself and be okay with that, regardless of if they accept you or not. Being vulnerable means being confident and comfortable enough with yourself to show that to others, and it's an important part of being human. I do think that every healthy relationship requires a level of vulnerability from both people involved. So why are there videos on YouTube telling you guys not to be vulnerable or not to show emotion? Well, I often hear things like the following. If you're unattractive, you can't be vulnerable. Women only like men to be vulnerable if they're attractive or rich. Vulnerability is weak and men aren't supposed to show emotion. And I see why men think this, because women are not always receptive to vulnerability or a man showing emotion, but I think that's often when it's done the wrong way. When you guys don't know how to do it in a way that's authentic or show emotion in a way that's not, just asking for attention. I think a lot of you guys don't know exactly how to go about this, or you're doing it the wrong way. And in those cases, it's not attractive to women because it's not being used properly. So two things that you really want to keep in mind to make sure that you're approaching this the right way is, number one, you want to reveal enough about yourself to where this person can see that you have depth and character to who you are and you're not just surface level. But you don't want to just spill everything and reveal everything. You want to leave a little to be desired, right? You want to leave a little room for imagination, and that's not playing games, that's not manipulating, it's just not necessarily showing everything about yourself on the first date, or word vomiting, a past story that is a reason why you're vulnerable, or whatever it is. I'm going to get into specific examples, but these are two really important things to keep in mind when you go into being vulnerable, or you're getting into a new relationship and you don't know how to approach certain topics or when to talk about certain things or open yourself up. I think keeping these things in mind is important, and these are the reasons why I think women are not receptive to you being vulnerable, is because you're probably making these mistakes. These are examples that are not attractive and mistakes that you're probably making. Number one is being vulnerable for attention. If you come from a place of wanting external validation or doing something to be needy or clingy, it's not going to come across the right way to a woman. If you're only being vulnerable for attention or for a pity party, it's not going to translate well. It should not be used as a tactic. So saying things like, you're too good for me, or you're so beautiful, I don't know why you're talking to me, is only going to make her doubt her decision to be talking to you or to be with you, and it's not going to do you any favors, and is actually going to do the opposite of be attractive to a woman, right? So I think a lot of guys make this mistake and then think, well, women don't like when I'm vulnerable. Women don't like when I show emotion because I did it and it didn't work, but that's because you didn't do it right. And saying things along those lines is not being vulnerable, it's being insecure for attention and for that external validation that is not attractive to women at all. So it should never come from a place of neediness. Forcing it or playing the victim is not going to do you any favors, and we all know that that kind of behavior is repulsive to women. So doing that is not going to land you in a place where this woman is attracted to your vulnerability, because it's not real vulnerability. And I think a lot of the times men think they're being vulnerable, but really they're just seeking attention and being insecure. So vulnerability and those things are very different. So I think it's really important that you know that going into it. So again, it should not be a tactic. The goal is not to seem vulnerable to women. It's to genuinely be vulnerable, be able to open up about, your biggest fears or your dreams or things that scare you. I mean, it's really just about being human and being able to connect with people on a deeper level that allows you to express yourself and be vulnerable, not to seem vulnerable. You'll be able to naturally open up, and it won't be something that you have to feel forced doing or be needy or clingy or any of those things. Point number two, mistakes that you're making that are absolutely not attractive, is emotional vomit and loss of control. Oh my gosh, have you ever been the victim of a conversation like this where the person is just spilling everything? It's what we call emotional vomit, and you feel incredibly uncomfortable. Because I know I've been there before. I'm wondering if any of you have, or if you're the person doing this. In that case, you want to cut this out. Emotional vomit is when you suddenly unload an inappropriate amount of emotions and personal history onto a conversation, and it's horrible. It often makes that other person feel extremely uncomfortable and is not attractive in any way. Say you're on a first date and you're going on and on, you're crying about how much you miss your ex or how much you're still in love with her and you can't get over her. Do you genuinely think that is going to be received well by the new person that you're on a date with? Let's just sit here for a minute and really think about that. The answer is no, because it shows a complete lack of control of your emotions and a lack of self-awareness that's going to repel the girl that you're out on a date with. So you don't want to fall victim to this emotional vomit, to, again, telling too much too soon, or just spilling everything, or even saying things that you should probably just keep to yourself. Vulnerability is not a lack of control or looking for someone to fix things for you. It's just, again, you being your authentic self, which is good to an extent, but also I don't want you guys to be self-sabotaging by doing what I'm talking about here. So again, keep those things I mentioned before in mind. You want to give enough to show that you have depth and character and you're not just surface level, but you also want to leave a little room for imagination. You don't want to just be word vomiting or emotional vomiting on the first date. Since we covered what is not attractive, now we're going to cover what is attractive. Number one is it takes your relationship to a new level. So as I mentioned before, every relationship that is healthy requires some level of vulnerability. While a relationship, of course, can bring out the absolute best in us, it can also bring out the absolute worst in us. And there's always going to be challenges and problems that rise to the surface. Not everything is sunshine and rainbows 24/7. So being able to be open and authentic and vulnerable with your partner is incredibly important. And again, it's a part of being human. Vulnerability creates a connection that could never happen from surface level interactions or conversations. It makes the other person feel more comfortable opening up to you as well, and just makes you feel closer to them. It creates a level of comfort and closeness that, again, you could not get from just staying surface level or basic all the time. You really want to get to know someone on a deeper level if you want to find out if they're a good match for you, right? Of course, you don't want to go into the first date asking the deepest questions the first second you meet her. You want to let this happen naturally and kind of build naturally as the conversation progresses. But getting into those deeper conversations and really, again, diving deeper instead of staying on the surface will do you so many favors. Another thing I'll say here about vulnerability is that it requires a level of self-awareness from you. And when you don't have that self-awareness aspect, I think that is when it becomes not attractive to women. Again, like I mentioned before, the guy who's crying about his ex on the first date. Anyone with self-awareness would know not to do that. It just doesn't make sense. It's obvious that it's not going to be well received. But someone who is self-aware would know better than to do that. And I think women view self-awareness as a very attractive trait. So again, when you have that vulnerability, it requires you to have that level of self-awareness that a guy who doesn't have that level of self-awareness would not have as much success as someone who does. And that leads me into my next point, which is that it allows women to be feminine and nurturing. When you are vulnerable, it tends to make a woman feel special, like she brought out this side of you, or you feel comfortable enough to talk about, your past or your family or something like that with her that maybe you wouldn't just share with anyone. It makes her feel special. Again, this should not be used as a tactic, but kind of a gauge for you to understand, like, okay, I feel comfortable telling this girl this. I feel like I can be my authentic self with her. I can be vulnerable with her. This is a good sign. And then when you open up to her, she's going to feel comfortable with you and open up to you, and it's going to create that closeness that I talked about before. So really, I think this can make a huge impact and take your relationship to a new level, like I just talked about. But it also, again, brings out her feminine and nurturing side. And if it doesn't, pay attention to that. I think the way that women respond to you opening up or to you being vulnerable and authentic says a lot about her. And if maybe she's not receptive to that, then maybe she's not a good match for you. Or maybe she has not gotten to a self-aware spot with herself where she feels like she can open up to you. It also shows that you have emotion and that you're human. And it really allows her to kind of step into that feminine role and be there to listen to you and really be receptive to what you're saying. Number 3 is that it shows confidence and security in yourself. So being vulnerable is probably one of the biggest signs that you are confident, because it requires you to be self-aware, again, like I mentioned before, but also be confident and comfortable enough with yourself to be authentic without being so worried if that other person will accept you or not. You accept yourself, so you're able to be that with other people instead of just constantly being a people pleaser or wondering if people will like you. It simply just shows that you're secure with who you are, which is so attractive to women. We all know that women love confidence, but even more than just attracting women, I think being vulnerable is important for anything that you do in your life, and being able to kind of make that next step and be more successful with your job, with your family, with your friends, with a romantic relationship. I think it all requires a level of vulnerability so that you're not just pretending to be someone you're not all the time, or again, acting like a robot. And to wrap it up here, I want to leave you with this quote I found online that I think really does a good job explaining vulnerability and how it can impact you. And it says, "Connecting with others in this way by being vulnerable, as opposed to overcompensating and trying to get everyone to like you, will result in some of the best interactions and relationships of your life." And I think it's incredibly true. And think about someone who is a people pleaser, who is always doing what everyone wants them to do, but they're never being authentic, they're never being themselves, they're never being the best version of themselves, right? They're just being what everyone else wants them to be. They will never reach a level of happiness and fulfillment that someone who is self-aware, self-actualized, who is vulnerable, who can be their authentic self will reach. So keep this in mind. I think being authentic is really important, and you should be able to be authentic with the people that are closest to you in your life, especially a romantic partner. So to answer the title of the video, is being vulnerable unattractive to women? I hope that this video helped paint a picture of the instances when it is versus when it's not, and the fact that you probably thought you were being vulnerable, but really you weren't, and you were just looking for that external validation and attention, and that is why it wasn't being well received by women. And that's why there's so many videos online telling you not to be vulnerable, not to show emotion, because sometimes we're not self-aware enough to know when we're doing it the right way, or when we're genuinely being vulnerable versus when we're just looking for that external validation and attention. So again, I hope that this video helped paint a picture and showed the difference between the two, because I do think there is a big difference that's not often talked about. So if you're someone who struggles with this, I encourage you to look at your past situations or relationships and interactions and really find out where you were on the spectrum. Were you just emotional vomiting and mistaking it for vulnerability, or were you being genuinely vulnerable? So really take a look, be self-aware, do some self-reflection. I think that's incredibly important for growing and evolving as a person and within our own relationship. So if you like this video or found it helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to be in the loop for when I release new content. If you haven't already, be sure to follow me on Instagram at Courtney Christine Ryan. I love connecting with all of you guys on there as well. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.